For episode 24, in the case of Jetta of the Mistress, she's about to visit her family in England. So the story begins at the Gabor estate. So that's Jetta. She was throwing darts at Jim's picture. That was until one day when Roxy at the Misfits started throwing insults at Jetta and, of course, her British inheritance. Then Roxy told Jetta this case that someday I will call your bluff. Oh, really? Jetta said. Then Stormer says, gee, I would wish I would like to go to England because my brother, you remember Craig from 23 episodes ago, he's in this episode, and guess what? He's back. I'll explain why in a minute, but first of all, Stormer also explains that her brother Craig is now with the band called the Blue Bloods, and they're performing there. So Pizzazz, who agrees with Stormer's idea, and says, why don't we all go? Then Pizzazz also suggested that since her father has one of the best jets there is, they can head there in England during the weekend. But Jetta says, wait a minute, we can't just head there right this minute. Relax, Jetta, Pizzazz says, because we don't even have a show in the next few days anyway. So, to convince Jetta otherwise, that's when Jetta says, think about it, this will be our opportunity to prove from you how wrong Roxy is. So Jetta, after she heard about Possess's suggestion, she says, okay. So what did Jetta do? She decided to make her arrangements with her parents back in England, but tells Possess before heading to the next room by saying, if you don't mind, I prefer to make that arrangements in private. So she heads off. So, in the next room, Jetta decides to call her parents back in England. So at the Burns residence, that's when Flo and Bertie, that's Jetta's parents, by the way, received a phone call from Sheila, aka Jetta. Oh, by the way, the town in England that Jetta comes from is Kingston, so that's where she grows up. That's Bertie, he's Jetta's father. He was looking at the racetrack results in his newspaper, saying that Silver Blaze was supposed to win at the racetrack later that afternoon. So Jetta's mother, Flo, went ahead and answered the phone. So Sheila, aka Jetta, told her mother Flo to say, it's me. So Flo, who's Jetta's mother, says, okay, what did you do this time? So Jetta says to her mother, listen, I want you and Daddy to do a favor for me. Oh, by the way, I'm bringing my friends the Misfits with me this weekend, but I need you to be as rich as you can be, and Daddy too. Then Jess says, but there's a problem. I need you to help me to convince the Misfits that we're going to be aristocrats instead of being on the poor side, if you know what I mean. So Flo says, really? With a title like that? So Jess says, listen to me. Pizzaz's father is very rich, and if we play our cards right, then we can all be rich in no time. So Bertie, who's Jetta's father, says, really? No kidding? We can? But Jetta's mother, Flo, rejects that idea and says, absolutely not. That's out of the question. So Jetta had to convince her parents otherwise and says, listen, Possess will throw me out of the band if she finds out I've been lying to her. And if that happens, guess what's going to happen? I may have to live with you guys again. So after Jetta's parents were convinced otherwise, that's when Flo says, just leave everything to us. We'll think of something. And Flo says, oh, even better. We'll have a Rolls Royce to pick you and your friends up at the airport. So after that, Jetta ends her phone call with her parents. So meanwhile in America at the Rock Hard Cafe, that's Cindy. She's the reporter and she's interviewing with the holograms. Also with the holograms is Mr. Ridley. Anyway, Jim just told Cindy the good news that Mr. Ridley owns a unicorn club in London, and Jim and her bandmates were allowed to perform there. Even better, Jim says there's going to be a benefit concert. So Cindy was asking Mr. Ridley if that was true. Not only did Mr. Ridley tell Cindy that's indeed true, and there is a benefit concert, but even better, Mr. Ridley said that there's a friend of his that needs to be helped out. So after Mr. Ridley told Cindy that's all for now, he heads off. Meanwhile, back in England, there's a horse race going on at the racetrack. Everyone was there, including Jetta's parents, Flo and Bertie, and they just bet on a horse named Silverblaze to win. So the horse race went as planned, the crowd cheering for their horses to win at the finish line and win a prize, of course. Finally, at the end of the race, Silver Blaze the horse wins the horse race. The Burnses cheered with joy, but there's only one person whose horse that didn't win was not exactly happy at all. So after Bertie and Flo had left the track, they got the winnings money from when Silver Blaze won, and then they paid Jack when they met up with him. Then Jack told Bertie and Flo, "Listen, I've heard about this other problem that we discussed about. Take a look at this gentleman over there." And there they saw him. Then Jack introduced Bertie and Flo to Lord Trevor. And Jack explains that Lord Trevor has a serious problem, a financial problem, if you will. And word has it, Jack says, that Lord Trevor has a house of his own. Now, Lord Trevor, as Jack explains, has lost all his money gambling. So that explains Trevor's financial problem. Also, as word has it, Jack says, that Trevor has owed a lot of creditors a lot of money, but he's broke. So after Jack had a chat with Flo and Bertie Burns, that's when the Burnses decided to catch up with Lord Trevor to have a chat with him. So, Bertie decided to discuss a favor with Lord Trevor by saying that their daughter is coming soon, Sheila, aka Jetta. "So I was wondering," Bertie says, "if we can borrow your house for the weekend." At first, Lord Trevor wasn't sure of it, but Trevor wants to know if they could pull it off, the Burnses, that is, and if they're sure about the money. So Trevor told Bertie and Flo Burns that he was more than happy to help them out in any way that they could, which means he's more than obliged to. So at the airport, just like his plan, the Misfits had arrived in London. But Stormer said that she refused to go with them to the Wessex estate because she said that she's going to be visiting Craig, her brother. But the Misfits are not the only ones because the Holograms are arriving there too. Also with the Holograms is Mr. Ridley, the owner of the Unicorn Club. So Mr. Ridley wanted to know from the Holograms if they could stop by at the Unicorn Club, and they agreed. So meanwhile, at the Wessex Manor, the Misfits, Jetta, Roxy, and Possess arrived straight there just the way it's planned, and that's when they met up with Jetta's parents, Bertie and Flo Burns, and Lord Trevor. So Pizzazz wants to know from Bertie if Lord Trevor's their butler. Of course he is. He's been with us for years, Bertie explains. So while two of the women, Pizzazz and Roxy, went on a tour to the Wessex Manor, that's when Bertie and Flo decided to have a discussion with their daughter. So Bertie wanted to know from his daughter, so what's the plan? "The first thing we'll do," Jetta explains, "is to sell as many items as we can for twice the price." So Jenna wants to know from Lord Trevor what kind of items that needs to be sold in any way, but Lord Trevor tells her that it didn't matter. Then Lord Trevor told Jenna that it must be done before 8 o'clock the very next night. So Jenna wants to know from Lord Trevor what's so special about it. "Never mind that," Lord Trevor said. "Just do it," Lord Trevor says, "and if you don't do it before 8 o'clock the next night, I'll expose you and your parents just how big of frauds you are." Then he heads to the next room. So in the kitchen, that's when Trevor told his henchmen by asking this question: had they found the Lord of Wessex yet? Stokes, who was one of the henchmen that Trevor had hired, not only said that he and his partner did, but even better, Stokes and his partner had found him at the Unicorn Club in London. So Lord Trevor not only said that they did a good job, but then said, "You two know what to do." So Lord Trevor told his henchmen that it must be done before 8 o'clock. "Don't worry about it," Stokes says. So in other words, Trevor is planning to get rid of the Lord of Wessex, whoever it may be. And why is that? Because as any person will tell you, that it's all part of the plan. Meanwhile, Mr. Ridley, Jim, and the Holograms had arrived at the Unicorn Club that Mr. Ridley owns. By the time that Mr. Ridley and the Holograms went inside, that's when they met with the members of the Blue Bloods, including Craig, that Asha have met since 23 episodes ago, the same person that dropped out of the drumming contest. So what Jim did first is to be introduced by Mr. Ridley to Mason Hawthorne, who was the leader of the band. Kimber, meanwhile, was introduced by Alan, who was the keyboardist of the band. And then she was also introduced to James, who was also the member of the band. Then, before long, Asha was face to face with Craig. You remember, 23 episodes ago, Craig said that he had to leave to straighten out his issues in Europe. So now Asha is once again face to face with Craig, the same Craig Phillips that dropped out of the contest. Not only is Asha happy to see Craig again, but then Mason says, "Well, what are we waiting for? We've got a couple of fates to celebrate." He told that to Mr. Ridley and Jim. So Jim wants to know, what's that second thing all about? Well, Mr. Ridley was more than happy to explain because the very next day is Mason's birthday, and it was the day that he's supposed to be turning 21. Then suddenly, just minutes later, when Jim shows up to tell everyone that there's something special about Mason, then he almost accidentally let slip about Mason's secret title. But Mason just brushed it off to James to say, "It's just my birthday, that's all." So back at the Wessex Manor, this time in the dining room, the Misfits, including Jetta's parents, were having dinner at the table. Then Jetta told her mother, "Isn't this great? All this silverware and plates that is worth a lot of money." Then Flo, who's Jetta's mother, who agrees with her daughter, says, "Even better, all the earls from many generations has eaten stuff off of these." Then Jetta asked Possess a question of would it be wonderful if she owned the entire set. "Really? You'll do that?" Possess was asking Jetta's mother, and Jetta's mother, who replied the same question to say, "Well, why not?" Then Flo says, "Even better, we can even spare you a set or two." So Possess seems pleased with it and throws the plate out the window. By accident, of course. So after that minor accident, that's when Possess told Lord Trevor, "Oh, don't worry about it. My father, Harvey, would be more than happy to pay for that and to send me the bill for all the silverware and stuff." Jetta, meanwhile, tries to calm down Lord Trevor and says, "Don't worry, by 8 o'clock tomorrow, all your money problems will be over sooner than you think." "For your sake, you better be correct," Lord Trevor said to Jetta, and then he heads off. So later, in the study room, Lord Trevor made a phone call to one of his henchmen, Stokes, in the alley in the phone booth, of course. So Trevor wants to know if the job had been taken care of yet. Well, Stokes said in his case that the Americans had flown the coop, if you pardon the expression, of course. Also, Stokes told Lord Trevor that they'll be coming back to do the benefit concert the very next day. So, in other words, what Stokes is telling Trevor that they'll be taken care of by tomorrow. "Well, make sure you do the job right," Trevor said in the study room of the Wessex Manor. "But remember," Trevor says, "it has to be done before 8 o'clock the very next night." And then he ends the phone call. The next morning, Lord Trevor agreed to introduce the Misfits to the horse stables. And inside were a lot of horses, and of course, a fox named Ulysses. As Pizzazz opened up the fox cage to let out Ulysses the fox, she told her bandmates Roxy and Jetta, "I know what we'll do. We'll have a fox hunt." And so we go into the fox hunt montage of "I'll Hunt You Down" by the Misfits. It was throughout the entire song that with Ulysses the Fox and the Misfits chasing him, they went everywhere from outside the manor to inside the manor, from the dining room to the hallway until finally in the living room. And then finally, when the song came to an end, Ulysses the Fox was relaxing on top of the moose head in the living room. Lord Trevor couldn't believe that all the mess that the Misfits made in the living room, and then suddenly the doorbell rings. When Trevor went ahead and answered the door, it was a couple of creditors demanding to be paid. Then the creditors told Trevor that for months he's been avoiding them. "Take it easy, fellas," Trevor says. "I promise you, you will get the money before the end of this day. I promise you." And then he left. Later, back at the Unicorn Club, well, the bandmates, the Holograms, were busy setting up for the benefit concert the way it's planned. In the meantime, Mr. Really just told Jim the good news that everybody's all set up for the benefit concert. However, Asha agrees to catch up with her bandmates later when Craig decided to have a long overdue confession to make with Asha. While that is going on, a couple of Lord Trevor's men that were hired by Lord Trevor previously decided to go on the mission, which the holograms are not aware of. And what they did is that they're about to plan some explosives inside the drum kit. So when Jim, Kimber, and Aja went inside the club, they were face to face with Stormer of the Misfits, and along with her with Mr. Ridley and Mason. By surprise, Stormer was telling Kimber, I was just leaving. So Kimber wants to know from Stormer, what's wrong with you? It's not like we're going to bite you or anything, Kimber said. Jim was horrified because she soon realized that she has a hunch that Stormer was not the only person. She suspected that other mistress must be there too. Back with Trevor's henchmen, they were busy planning a bomb inside the drum kit, but neither of the band members were exactly aware of it yet. Back with Aja and Craig, who continued to have a conversation at the patio area just nearby at the club. So Craig, however, confessed to Aja that there's something that he'd been wanting to tell her for a very long time, and it's been something on his mind. And on top of that, it was something he had to get off his chest. So Craig told Aja, there's been someone I've been wanting you to meet for a long time. I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid of what is going to happen. What is it? Aja says. What is it you're trying to tell me? What secret? Oh, you'll see. So Aja agrees to have Asha come to the club with him while Trevor's men were on their way out. In the meantime, the explosives that Trevor's men had set inside the drum kit is set to explode in the next 4 minutes. Back with Stormer, who was pleading desperately with Kimber along with Jim and Rhea to please let me go, and behind her were the Blue Blood members, Mason, Alan, James, and also Mr. Ridley, until minutes later when Craig comes back with Aja. So Craig tells Kimber, I hate to be rude, but I want to introduce Aja to someone. And by surprise, Craig just dropped a bombshell on Aja and says, this is my secret who I've been wanting to tell you. This is Mary Phillips, aka Stormer of the Misfits. But Asha accidentally jumped to conclusions to say that Craig was a married man. And so she flipped out and slapped Craig in the face and said, Mary's your wife? But she didn't realize that Mary was in fact Craig's sister. And that's when Asha says, how could you lie to me like this? I'll never speak to you again. In fact, don't come even near me. And so Asha stormed off. And catching up with Asha were Rhea and Jim. Back with the bomb that was inside the drum kit, it will be set to explode in almost 3 minutes. When back with Kimber after Asha stormed off, she has to question Craig to say, why didn't you tell her this sooner? How could you lead her on like this? And then turns to Stormer to say, you should be ashamed of yourself. But Stormer pleaded her case to say, I would never lie to you, honest. Craig is in fact my brother. When Kimber learned about it, she says, what? You mean Craig's not married? Oh my goodness, I gotta tell Asha right away. And so she ran out to join up with Asha, Jim, and Rhea. Now Craig, who was brokenhearted, was asked by Mason, aren't you gonna do anything? Well, Asha's the one who's wrong, Craig says, and that she's the one that should apologize. Back outside the patio, Asha was told by Jim and Rhea that there's been a mistake. And then minutes later, Kimber shows up to say, you made a mistake. Stormer's not Craig's wife, she's his sister. When Asha heard that from Kimber, she said, what? Did you say that Craig's not married? Stormer's his sister? And not his wife? Oh dear, what have I done? Look what I did. Well, that's what happens when you jump to the wrong conclusions instead of looking for the facts. So now it's up to Asha to apologize. Back inside the club, that's when Mason told Craig, well, if you won't do something about it, then I will. And so he runs out, along with the rest of the bandmates, Alan, James, and of course Mr. Ridley. And so that leaves Craig alone with his sister, Stormer, aka Mary. In the meantime, the bomb in the drum kit will be setting off to explode in the next minute or two. So now it's Stormer, aka Mary's turn to plead a case with her brother to say, come on, Mason's right. You gotta go make up with Asha. She does care about you after all. So once again, Craig, who follows his sister's suggestion, decides to make up with Asha. and they both head out to the club. In the meantime, the bomb in the drum kit was about to explode any minute. Back outside the patio, when Asha realized that it's now up to her to make up with Craig, but before she did so, the bomb inside the club exploded. Luckily, she'll be alright, but will Craig and Stormer be alright? Well, after the bomb exploded, Asha knew that she has to go save Craig and his sister. But she's not alone because Mr. Ridley, along with Alan, James, and Mason, went along with her. So back inside the club, now in ruins because of the bomb's explosion. Well, good news, Asha found Craig, but he was knocked from behind because of the bomb's explosion. So now it's up to her to lift up the bin to get him out, but she couldn't lift it. But thanks to Mason and James who helped out, they managed to lift the beam up so that Asha could get him out. As for Mr. Ridley and Alan, they turned to Stormer, who's Craig's sister, and both of them got out just in time. Well, good news, everybody made it out. But the bad news, the Unicorn Club is now in ruins. So it's now up to the firefighters to take care of the fire. But in the meantime, Asha's tending to Craig. He said, "What happened?" "Don't move, you'll be fine," Asha said. In the meantime, James Mason is tending to Stormer, who gave her a glass of water. And now, poor Mr. Ridley is devastated that his Unicorn Club is now in ruins because of that bomb's explosion, and he felt ashamed about it. But then Mason speaks up to Mr. Ridley to say, "This is my fault, not yours." "What do you mean it's your fault?" Jim asked. And that's when Mason accidentally let slip to Jim to say it was all part of his uncle, Lord Trevor's plan, and he's the one that planned it from the beginning. Mason also explains to Jim that Lord Trevor, who's Mason's uncle, wanted to make sure that he was, quote, done away with so he wouldn't be turned 21 the very night, which will be 8 o'clock. Then Mason told Jim that unless he claims his title and does it very soon before 8 o'clock, because he knows that if he doesn't, this could mean a problem. But Mr. Ridley knew that Mason won't be going alone because Mr. Ridley said that he's going with Mason. In the meantime, Jim asked Shayna to stay with Asha and Craig, and Shayna agreed, so that leaves Kimber and Rhea to go with her. Jim, that is. So back with Asha and Craig, Asha goes first to apologize for jumping to the wrong conclusions, and that she should have known from the beginning that Stormer, aka Mary of the Misfits, was his sister. So Asha asked Craig, "Will you ever forgive me? I've been such a fool." Not only did Craig forgive her for what has happened, but he told her that his only regret is that he had wished he had told Asha sooner about his sister rather than later. So Craig asked Asha, "What do you say we start over with a clean slate?" And so they made up with a kiss. So meanwhile, at the Wessex Manor, it was in the living room that Possess had dismissed a request from Flo, who's Jetta's mother. In the library, the two henchmen that just got back from the club that is now destroyed told Trevor the bad news that the Lord of Wessex got away, even though the club is destroyed. When Trevor looked at the clock, it is now 15 minutes to 8 o'clock. 7:45, of course. "Well, no matter," Trevor said, "but I had to come up with something, and something has to be done quick." "Go wait outside," Trevor said, and the henchman agreed, and they left the room. So after Lord Trevor takes out the entire mortgage for the Wessex Manor, he asks Jetta if she and her parents can come see him in the library, and so they agreed. So later in the library slash study room, after Jetta and her parents were seen by Lord Trevor, she asked him, "What's going on?" "I'm afraid there's bad news," Lord Trevor said. "There's been a change of plan." Then Lord Trevor told Jetta, "You see these papers right here? They must be signed before 8 o'clock, and that way you can earn the entire title, the whole estate, the whole 9 yards." "Really?" Jetta asked. "I can have the entire thing?" Then Bertie, who's Jetta's father, said to Lord Trevor, "You must be out of your mind." Then Jetta says, "Wait a minute." Then Jetta looks at her mother and says, "I know just how we can pull this off." So she told Lord Trevor this news, that if we can get Possessed to sign these papers, she can have the whole estate, the title, and everything else. So 5 minutes later, at 7:50 p.m., which is 10 minutes to 8 o'clock, that's when Jetta told Possess that if she signs these papers, that means she can have everything, including everything that goes along with it, the estate itself and the title. And then, after Jetta told Possess of the Misfits what she thought of it, she says, Lady Waysex, eh? That does have a nice ring to it. So even though Jetta agrees with Possess and says not even Jim can have a title like this, it is now 8 o'clock, just 10 minutes later, that's when Possess says, okay, I'll sign. And just when she was about to sign the papers, but then at the last minute, the voice from out of nowhere says, not so fast. It's Mason, but he's not alone because with him are Mr. Ridley and Jim. The next thing that Mason did was to whistle for Ulysses the Fox to grab the papers away from Possess when she's about to sign it. And what Ulysses the Fox did was to give the papers right to Mason. So, yep, you've heard right. Mason is indeed the real Earl of Wessex all along, and Ulysses, he's his pet fox. Jim just couldn't believe what she heard from Mason himself, that he's indeed the real Earl Hawthorne of Wessex. She says, you? Mason? So yes, the plan backfired, and Possess just couldn't believe it, and she decided to blame it on Jetta by saying, I've been tricked, and this is your fault. Even Trevor couldn't believe it, and neither did Jetta's parents. They're now all in serious trouble. So Jetta's parents, Flo and Bertie, told their daughter, we gotta get out of here. So they ran first, then she ran behind her parents, knowing that she's now in trouble for tricking Possess of the Misfits. So thanks to Ulysses the Fox, he was followed by Mason, Mr. Ridley, Jim, Kimber, and Rhea to chase after the bad guys and along with Trevor's men. So speaking of which, back with Trevor's men who had waited outside earlier, they saw Mason coming and says, we gotta get out of here. And so off they went, along with Ulysses the Fox, Mason, Jim, Kimber, Mr. Ridley, and Rhea chasing them. Back with Trevor's henchmen, they were on their way outside when Jim, she knows what to do. She projected a pack of hound dogs to stop the henchmen in their tracks, and so they did. Trevor's men who saw the dogs ran the other way. Instead, they got tackled from behind thanks to Mason and Mr. Ridley until the authorities arrived. So thanks to the British police, Lord Trevor, now Trevor, and his henchmen were being put away and are now being sent to jail. And so Jim wants to know from Mason, why didn't you tell me this sooner? Well, I could if I had, Mason told Jim, but I didn't have a title yet until at this very minute. You see, Trevor had complete control of this estate itself, Mason, now Earl Hawthorne, explained this to Jim. It was until that time came when I turned 21 that I have now in full control, thanks to you, Jim. Besides, I just want you to like me for myself, not just the title itself, Lord Hawthorne explains. So Lord Hawthorne also explained to Jim why the benefit concert was necessary and why Mr. Ridley had sent for her. It's because the estate lately has been running out of money. And now, because of my uncle's gambling problem, he ran up all the bills, and that's why he's been falling further and further behind until he gets all these debts paid, Lord Hawthorne said. And that's why Lord Trevor needed the money so bad. But now he has to spend the rest of his life in jail. And now, Earl Hawthorne explains even further that unless these bills are paid, I'll lose everything. The entire estate, the club, the whole 9 yards. Jim now understands why the estate itself is in serious trouble. So Jim says, don't worry, we can still have a benefit concert right here, rather than the club itself, she suggested. So back to the living room, Earl Hawthorne, Jim had met up with Mr. Ridley and Rhea, who found Jetta's parents in the stable. And so Mason demands to know who's responsible, who's going to pay for all of this. So Bertie Burns, who's Jetta's father, said that Pizzazz will do it. Then Pizzazz of the Misfits decide to turn on Flo, who's Jetta's mother. Then Flo, who's Jetta's mother, decide to say that Roxy will pay it. Then Roxy decided to say that Bertie, who's Jetta's father, should pay them. Then Jetta's father, by surprise, decided to turn on his own daughter, Jetta, and said that she's responsible. So Jetta, who was outraged, and asked her father, "Me, are you crazy?" So Jim told Mason, I just may have an idea. So what was Jim's suggestion to Mason? I can't say for sure, but he said it is a good idea. That all of them will pay. So you know what this means? Jetta, Roxy, and Possess will be punished for everything else. So you know what this means? They have to do some community service. So outside the Wessex Manor, the benefit concert for Jim and the Holograms went the way as planned with the song Between Me and You by the Holograms. It was during that song that Mason and Jim became the Queen and King of England. Then they started flying all over London, from Big Ben, which is the biggest clock tower, to the Buckingham Palace and the famous Tower Bridge on the Thames River, of course. So, long story short, after the song ended, it is thanks to Jim and the Holograms in their benefit concert, which was a success. Mason will have enough money to pay the bills. Mr. Ridley will have enough money to have the club rebuilt. So, meanwhile, in the kitchen, the Misfits were busy polishing and doing dishes, and that's when Pizzazz said that she had reached her limit on Jetta's stories, and she had had enough of it. And so that ends episode 24.